All right, so we're diving into something that on the surface might seem kind of dry. School budgets. But trust me, these numbers, they can tell a story. And today we're zeroing in on Centennial School District spending for 2022 to 2023. The year Superintendent Bedden really got going with their vision, you know.
What's interesting here is you can see Bedden's priorities like right there in the dollars and cents. It's not just about keeping the lights on, it's about choices. And those choices, while they impact teachers, resources, and at the end of the day, the students.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest things that jumps out is just how much Centennial is putting towards directly helping students learn. I mean, we're talking a whole 19.8% more per student on something called basic instructional programs than the regional average.
19.8% more. That's a huge difference.
It is. We're talking almost $2,000 more. For each student in Centennial, it's $10,499 compared to 8,762 wolves in your average district.
Yeah, that's not chump change. It's a real investment. It makes you think, like, what are they able to do with all those extra resources that other districts can't?
Exactly. And maybe before we get too far into that, we should unpack what exactly basic instructional programs means, for folks who don't speak school budget.
Yeah, good point. We're talking about the core of education, teacher salaries, textbooks and supplies, classroom technology, basically all the essential stuff for teaching and learning.
Got it. So Centennial's pouring way more money into that essential stuff than its neighbors. But there's this other piece of the puzzle that I find really interesting, how they're managing to keep their administrative costs so low.
Yeah, that's the other side of the coin. They're spending a tiny $327 per student on general administration. That's a 45.6% savings compared to the regional average of $598.
Wow, okay.
And it's not just at the district level. School administration costs are lower, too.
All right, so even though I'm no math whiz, it sounds like that frees up a lot of money to go right back into the classrooms.
Yeah.
But I got to ask, is there a trade-off here? Can you really run a whole school district efficiently with, like, bare-bones admin staff?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Are they just super efficient, or are there some corners being cut that could come back to bite them later? This is where things get really interesting, because we got to look at the big picture.
You mean how all these pieces fit together, the extra money for instruction, the lean admin, and what it means for students in the end?
Exactly. And to really understand that, we need to look at how Centennial is investing in a more well-rounded approach to education. It's not just about academics, it's about supporting the whole child.
Right.
Centennial is putting more resources into something called Instruction Added Needs Adult Continuing Education. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, but basically it covers all those things that go beyond the traditional classroom,
Okay, so we're talking about things like special ed, counseling services, maybe even after-school programs.
Exactly. And that's where that whole holistic approach comes in. They're acknowledging that, hey, not all students learn the same way, right? And some need extra support to really succeed. Plus, this category also includes money for adult education programs, which is kind of unique for a school district.
It does sound like Superintendent Bedden is trying to build a system that really supports students and families from all angles. But I am curious, what kind of specific programs would fall under this added needs?
Well, think about like a student who's struggling with reading. This funding could mean that they get a reading specialist just for them to work one-on-one. Or it could fund a program that gives after-school tutoring to kids from low-income families. It could even cover things like mental health counseling or those social-emotional learning programs you hear about.
Wow, that's definitely not your typical back-to-basics approach some districts take. But going back to those low administrative costs for a second, I'm still a little skeptical. How can they cut administration so much and not sacrifice quality?
Yeah, it's a fair point. But one way they might be doing it is by using technology and shared services to streamline things. Like instead of each school having its own admin staff for like payroll or HR, it might have all that at the district level.
So they're finding ways to work smarter, not harder. Makes sense. But what about at the individual school level? Doesn't cutting school administration mean things like less support for principals or fewer resources for teachers?
It's a balancing act for sure. Less admin can save money. But you don't want to stretch principals and teachers too thin either. So we have to look at the downsides too. And ask some tough questions.
Like, are teachers getting stuck with more admin work?
Yeah.
And burning out? Are there enough support staff for things like special ed or counseling?
Exactly. We don't have all the answers just from these budget documents, but it definitely brings up some important questions about how they're making this lean approach work at the school level.
Okay, so we've seen how Centennial is focusing on direct instruction, taking a holistic approach to student needs, and streamlining administration. It's a pretty bold strategy, right?
It definitely goes against the grain compared to a lot of other districts, but the real question is, does it actually work?
You mean, are these choices leading to better outcomes for students? That's what matters at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely. And to answer that, we need to look at the data.
So we spent this deep dive really digging into Centennial School District's budget. And honestly, it's been way more fascinating than I thought it would be. We've seen how Superintendent Bedden has really put a focus on instruction and on taking this holistic approach, and of course on keeping admin lean.
And now it's like, okay, do those choices actually make a difference for the students? That's the bottom line. Right.
Totally. But like we talked about before, it's not simple to measure those outcomes in education. It's not just test scores, right? It's graduation rates, how many kids go to college, even like, are the students doing okay mentally and emotionally?
Yeah. We're talking about the long game here, not just quick wins. So what's the story with Centennial?
Well, the data's still a bit thin, but there are some good signs.
Okay, I'm listening.
Their graduation rate has been going up for a few years now, and it's actually better than the state average, which tells you they're doing something to keep those kids engaged and on track to graduate. Yeah, that's definitely a positive sign. What about college? Are more kids going to college after Centennial?
It's looking good there too. More Centennial grads are going to college compared to the average around here.
Yeah.
This could be where that investment in basic instruction really shows up. Like they're giving those kids the skills and knowledge they need to succeed in college.
So maybe their approach is working, at least looking at these numbers. But like we said before, just because things seem connected doesn't mean one causes the other. Could be other factors at play.
That's a really important point. We can't jump to conclusions. It's still early in Bedden's time there. And we need more data to know if these good trends stick around. Plus, we got to look beyond the averages, right? Are all the students doing better or just some?
Yeah, that's a good point. Rising graduation rates and more kids going to college doesn't tell the whole story. Are these improvements happening for everyone, no matter their background or what their situation is like?
Exactly. We need to zoom in, see how these changes are affecting different groups, students of color, students from low-income families, students with disabilities. Are they seeing the same kind of progress?
And let's not forget those potential trade-offs we talked about. Is the district's bare-bones approach to admin causing any problems we didn't expect? Are teachers feeling overloaded? Are some programs or services being cut?
All good questions that deserve more looking into. Centennial's definitely doing things differently. They're walking the walk when it comes to prioritizing instruction and supporting the whole child.
But like with any experiment, there are going to be wins and losses along the way. It's a process. Learning, adapting, and always trying to do what's best for the kids.
So what does all this mean for you, dear listener? What can you take away from this budget deep dive? I think the main takeaway is that education funding, well, it's complicated and there aren't easy answers.
Yeah, it's about making choices, figuring out what's most important, and always checking to see if those choices are actually helping the students. And it's a conversation we all need to be part of.
Whether you're a parent, a taxpayer, or just someone who cares, stay informed. Ask those questions, make your voice heard. The future of education, it really does depend on it.
And that wraps up our deep dive into Centennial School District's budget. Hopefully you've got a better sense of how tricky education funding can be. And maybe you're even a little curious about how your own local schools are making these big decisions that affect students.
Until next time, keep learning, keep digging, and keep asking those tough questions.